I have this enormous gratitude for trail running, for the community, for all the adventure that it's given me. And I never expected to be here. And if I get to give that back in some way, like if some woman or girl or like whoever, some guy who counted themselves out of being an outdoorsy person finds it and feels welcome and feels like it changes their life, like I'm pretty good with that.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. We are psyched to announce a new partner of the podcast, Lauren Daniels. Lauren is a realtor helping buyers and sellers in the greater Denver and Boulder area and beyond, and has been a good friend of mine for a few years now. When I decided I wanted to buy a place in Boulder and put down roots here, I was completely overwhelmed by the home buying process. Lauren was already a good friend, so when we first talked about home buying, I felt a huge sense of relief. She's a neighborhood expert, has an incredible attention to detail, available for any and all questions, and made what could be a very difficult process super easy. And now we've got a beautiful home in Boulder. It's close to the trails with a big backyard for Alfie and views of the Flatirons. So if you're even considering buying a home in the area or anywhere, I highly recommend working with Lauren. You can reach her at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. Thanks so much to Lauren for supporting the podcast and helping us continue to grow, and for all those miles together. Going on 4 years now, For the Long Run has continued to grow with the help of listeners like you and sponsors that believe in what we're doing. Goodr has been with us since March of 2021, and I'm excited to share that they've just released ski goggles. These shades are not only the best looking frames on any snow-capped mountain, they're also Goodr's first official step into winter sports. With wraparound frames that won't fog up while you're sending it down the mountain, dodging Yetis, or going extreme at the ski lodge with your hot toddy, Goodr's Snow G's will keep you covered, literally. They're wraparound frames after all. And they're priced at $75. If you want to support the show and grab a pair, Goodr is giving you free shipping on your order. There's a link in the show notes, and you can go to goodr.com/FTLR, which is valid for any product on their website. And welcome back. I have Brooke Torres joining me on the podcast from Boston temporarily. Brooke, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
Of course. So as we were just talking about, when we first met, I hadn't started this podcast and you hadn't started your company. So very cool to see how both of our journeys have progressed over that 4+ year period, and super excited to dive into this with you. So the first question of this podcast is always a tough one. Who is Brooke?
Yes, that's a deep question. So I am the CEO and founder of Hilma, which is a new running shoe company. It is something I didn't expect to be doing. I sort of found my way here through running. I'm a runner. I love probably trail running most of all. I love hiking and just being outdoors with friends and the community. I live in Boston and get to do lots of different adventures around the US through work and through honestly just prioritizing life that way. And yeah, I think that's my summary.
I love it. How did you find running, or how did running find you?
I was really surprised to find joy in running. I think when I think about a little version of myself, I was active and I loved to be outdoors, but I thought that running was really elite, really exclusive. I thought it was sort of punishing. And if I look back to the roots of some of it, it's like I remember seeing the like women's magazines at the checkout of the grocery store with my mom. And I felt like running was this obligation that women did for weight loss. Like that was literally what I thought of it. And when I would see people running, I would literally think as a kid, I'd be like, oh, that doesn't look like the best. But, you think about it, as a kid, you run around for fun, like you run and you play. So I had this kind of deep history of an aversion to running. But after college, I was feeling really empowered by my career. I was an early hire at a couple different startups, and I was enjoying how much I was learning and growing. And I got interested in what else I could do that I'd kind of counted out for myself. And running a marathon was very much on that list. So I signed up for, trained for it and ran my first marathon in 2016. And I absolutely loved it. And I was learning so much about myself. I was dispelling a lot of the myths of, what I was talking about, what my perception of running was. And I was also realizing how many people were like me, where, I showed up to race day and I just wanted to complete the race and I just wanted to have an interesting day. And it was like, I was not going to win the race, And it was such an amazing experience. And then I got into trail running pretty soon after. I think I ran my first ultra maybe like a few months after that. And or maybe a little longer. I'm getting my timelines mixed up, but I just loved that as well. And I loved the community. I loved hearing people's stories. And so I was just, I was hooked.
When we first met, I think you were training for 100K. Does that ring a bell?
That probably rings a bell. The 100K has eluded me over and over again. I'm hoping it's my year. I've had sort of a series of injuries and mishaps, and so it goes. But I think that's kind of part of the journey, right?
Totally. Yeah, I find I like to say that, like, if you're not injured every once in a while, there's you're leaving a little bit more on the table, or maybe you're not dreaming big enough. But if you're getting injured all the time, maybe evaluate your training, your footwear,
Hmm.
or a handful of other things. So, talk to me about that first finish line of the marathon. What was that like for you?
It was so emotional. I wish I could go back and relive it. And whenever I hear about someone running their first marathon, I'm like, oh, you have that warmth and that kind of good reminiscing about it. And I feel so psyched for them. I think for me, there were a number of things, I think a lot about mindset and psychology of running as well as founding a company, because I think there's been just so much in common with the two of them. And when I went out that day, I had some amount of question of whether I could finish or not. And that actually made it an awesome day for me, because all I wanted was to get through the day. It helped me also go out fairly conservatively. Like, I was conscious not to be too far up in the pack from where I should be. And I just was overwhelmed with gratitude as I was going through the race that I was getting to do it. And I remember getting towards those final miles, and I was definitely suffering, but because I'd gone out not too fast, I was like hurting, but I wasn't in extreme misery kind of thing. And I was just definitely in tears nearing the finish line and after. And I was like, wow, I did this thing I thought I could never do. And I think it just chipped away at this idea that I had of myself and sort of who I thought I was and who I thought I could be. And it sounds like sort of cheesy in a way, but it really opened up my world and what I considered for myself going forward.
You mentioned something there. You alluded to, like, a curiosity of, you didn't know if you were going to finish, and that's like an exciting thing. There's so much predictability in the world today, and there's a lot of unpredictable things too, of course. But many of us lead lives that are routine and predictable, and there's some aspect of comfort. Obviously, day to day is different, but overall, if you're listening to this, like, you have some sort of phone or computer or device, and you know that is likely, some suggestive of some aspect of consistency or whatnot. But anyway, um, you talk about curiosity, or you allude to curiosity. I'm curious how much that theme, or that principle, shows up in your life as a runner, but also you've worked at startups your whole career, I think. Talk to me about that overlap, or that commonality.
Yeah, it's such a good call out because there is so much overlap. And I don't think it was something, I think sometimes when you're a kid, kids are naturally curious. And then as you get older, in some ways it can get taken out of you a little bit. And being a curious person, and I think anyone can be a curious person, and it's really about leaning into what you're curious about and sort of following that thread. But being a curious person is now something I really appreciate about myself that I hadn't probably identified before. And, taking running as this perfect example, I was insatiably curious about other people's stories when I was just starting to train. I wanted to hear about what their journeys had been like. I wanted to hear about the tactical stuff. I wanted to hear about like what had gone wrong and what had gone right. And so I was, driving all over to run. That's kind of how I was scheduling my weekends and stuff. I wanted to discover new trails as I was doing this, new, paths. And I would audible and podcast the whole way. And I was just like an obsessive, I was obsessed. And at the time I was almost a little embarrassed of myself, where I was like, oh, I'm reading about all these ultra runners and I'm like getting ready to run my first half. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about that, right? You're kind of your own worst critic. But I think following the curiosity and going in the direction that you feel pulled to and really exploring that has been a theme of my running, and then also ultimately led me into starting the company as well. And I've been grateful to have pursued those things.
What were some of those podcasts you were listening to?
I used to listen a lot to Eric Schran's
Ultra
oh my
Runner.
gosh, Ultra Runner. I
Yep.
listened to so much of that. And Sarah Lavender Smith was on there too. And it's kind of crazy full circle, because I remember listening to so many of those. And I recently reached out to Sarah Lavender Smith and I was like, I can't tell you how much hearing you interview people and talk about your running impacted me. And I'd love to send you a pair of Hilmas, because it's just this crazy sort of full circle thing to now have a product that, I can share with people who helped me get to do something like this.
That's super cool. Yeah, it's that's definitely a fun full circle moment. Um, let's talk about your beginnings in the startup world. What was it about startups that you were drawn to? And so, for context, I've known Brooke for, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 7, 6 years now. One of her old coworkers is a colleague of mine. She's on our executive team, and somehow it came up that I met Brooke, and she was like, "Oh my God, Brooke is the most incredible person ever."
Oh.
And Brooke had the same to say about her. Um, shout out to Tara if you're listening.
Yes, she's the best.
So curious about your beginnings professionally.
Yeah, so when I was getting ready to graduate college, and even before that, I had a million different ideas of what I wanted to do. There was something new every week. I was like, okay, maybe I want to do documentary film. Maybe I want to be a teacher. Maybe I want to, you name it. I was exploring it and just thinking about it. And I started, then, graduation creeps up. I'm starting to apply for jobs. And I was looking at certain job descriptions at big companies and being like, oh my gosh, I cannot. Like they didn't feel broad enough for me. I remember reading like some ads jobs, and I think your career is very much also about finding a match with your personality. Like, I'm someone who sort of appreciates a lot of breadth. And what I realized was that at a startup, I could have a lot of breadth in what I was learning about. I could do more than I was qualified for, at the risk of making lots of mistakes, which I've obviously done a million times. But I was willing to have that trade-off of more responsibility than I was qualified for, with the learning that came along with it and kind of the discomfort and the uncertainty that came along with it. So I was reading articles on this site called The Muse, and it was all this information about how how to think about navigating your career and how to interview and how to ask for a promotion and things that were pretty revolutionary for me. I think careers, and especially startups, and every career subculture has its own can feel like it has a black box, especially when you're coming out of college and you're like, I have no context for how people show up at the office and how they do things and how they communicate. So I was really enjoying this website's content. I realized that they were hiring, and I reached out to them and I was like, I love your content. It's changing my life and I would love to work for you. Like, here's who I am. And they hired me. And so I got to work that was two female founders, Catherine and Alex. I got to sit in the office with them and, listen to them talk about all different areas of the company. I got to listen to the engineers talking about what they were building. And, I was just fascinated by the company. And I also felt really pulled to our mission, where I was like, this had meant a lot for me. This had helped me navigate starting my career, and I wanted that for other people. And we were focused on women as well, so I wanted that for other women. So it was just a great start, and I found a lot of joy in it.
And so as time went on, you had an experience at a couple different startups. At what point did you start thinking that you wanted to steer your own ship?
So it's interesting. I talked to a lot of different founders about their journeys, and some people are like, I want to start a company. What is the idea? And I was more starting to think, like, I wonder if I would start a company. And the answer for me for sure was, or started to become, if I had the right idea and something that I was really excited about, I might do that. And it was definitely daunting to me. I mean, it was a lot like that first marathon or first ultra or whatever, where I had butterflies around even the idea of it. But what was happening with my running at the same time was it was taking up more and more of my life and my fun. And I had worked more B2B and media startups. So I hadn't worked in physical product, but I was just kind of constantly thinking about my experience and other people's experiences. And I started to, I'd been trying to figure out the right running shoe for me the whole way. And I had tried everything. I had tried a lot of, I tried different brands. I'd bought stuff online, I'd bought stuff in the running store. And I initially had thought I was this edge case, that everyone else had a running shoe that worked for them, and they'd found it easily. But what I started to realize was how many people were like me. And that was kind of the original, it was just percolating for me, this idea of a more personalized fit model, which is what Hilma ultimately became.
The way you outlined that is fascinating, right? There are so many people. I'm like pretty active on Twitter, and founder Twitter is a subset of Twitter. I've like found a lot of, I guess, enjoyment is one word, but also learning. There are a lot of people that I work with in my day job that have done super cool, interesting things, and I follow them on Twitter. And like I see this, and there's so much discourse around market fit or the right person for the right job, or all these different variables that go into like, is this the right thing to do? I listened to a podcast called My First Million. It's a couple of guys who basically just talk about making their first $1 million, and these like big bright ideas that they're just out walking their dog, or they're out with their whatever, and they have these ideas and they just talk about it. So it's fascinating to hear about how it's either the person exploring, like, could I do something interesting? What are these ideas that I have? Are they legitimate? Whereas the opposite of that is like, hey, here's a problem that is a
Mhm.
problem for me. I wonder if it's a problem for other people. Maybe I should investigate this. And it's like peeling back the layers of the onion. And it's the like, I think both aspects are completely valid. And there are companies that, like Facebook, I don't know that it was solving a problem that existed versus creating this new thing, or iPhones, right? Like, or iPads are a better example. Like, a product was created, a category was created that didn't exist previously. It wasn't solving a problem of a missing thing. Maybe convenience was what it was solving. But what you've done, and I want you to do a more formal explanation of what it is in just a second, but like what you've done is super cool, because it's like, hey, I have this thing that is a problem for me. I'm going to fix it. Um, Before we get to the explanation of Hilma, have you always been that way, of like, you're just going to figure something out and make it work? Or was this like, this is too good of an idea to let somebody else figure it out?
Yeah. Ooh, good question. part of my journey in my life, and I would call myself a little bit of a late bloomer in different ways, has been building the confidence to go check out something that I want to check out. And it was that way with running. It was that way with my career. It was that way with, I don't know, just different life adventures that I've had or different risks that I've taken. And so I think at the time at which I got to starting the company, I was at a place where I'd built up to say, okay, I'm ready to check this out. And then the more that I checked it out, the more that I was really on fire about it. And the more that I'd gotten over my own objections to why I shouldn't do it. Because sometimes you're negotiating against yourself and you're saying, for me in this instance, when I first thought about the idea for Hilma, I thought, oh, I'd be crazy to start a running shoe company because I don't even know how running shoes are made. And I knew it was this really technical product. I knew there were people with decades of experience. And I kind of thought, there's like a better person to do this. Or it's just so outside of what I've done before. But the more you learn and the more I think you show up for things that you feel a little underprepared for, or you're not sure how it's going to go, the more I think it builds resilience and the more it empowers you to see that A, you can get through hard things, you can take on whatever challenges, and B, that going through those things is in and of itself a learning and growing experience that puts you on a continued path to following, whatever it is you're drawn to the sort of curiosity point before.
So how long was it from when the idea first came into your head that, hey, I could do this better than it's been done, to I'm doing this, get out of my way?
Yeah. So I was definitely living the problem for a number of years. And I had realized probably 3 years before I had the idea for the company, I'd realized that a shoe that fit me really well in terms of volume and shape and sort of distribution of shape did not work very well on, for instance, my best friend who was also a size 8. So I'd known that for a while. And that was probably one of the original insights. But it wasn't until, probably a few years later, I was like, why hasn't someone done a more personalized, a broader fit model that takes differences in body into account? And then it was probably 6 months of really, I'm going to say like noodling on the idea, starting to talk to people a little bit about it. At some point along that way, I made a decision where I was like, I'm going to really pursue this. Like, I'm going to really figure out if this makes sense or not. And then I started to connect with people in the industry as much as I could. And I was asking questions like, why hasn't someone done this before? Could this work?
What were the answers you were getting?
The answers that I was getting were, first of all, very encouraging to me because one of them was like, well, it's hard. One of them was that exist. And I was like, okay, like that's fine. One of them was about existing supply chains. Like what it is expensive. Essentially what we do, maybe I should say, so that it makes sense.
What is Hilma?
Okay. So Hilma we like to talk about it as mass personalization of running shoes. And our goal is to slot people into a very comfortable running shoe for them. We've started with all women's fits. So they are truly constructed on, women's bodies and the way that their feet differ from men's. And one way, so the way that you would buy Hilmas is you would go to our site, you would take a survey, and that takes like 5 minutes. You answer questions about your body, your experience with other products. So you say like, hey, I've run an X brand before. It fit me fairly well. I look for more room in the toe box, or like my toes tend to feel squished. I have a hard time with that. My heel tends to slip. And you also answer questions about your preferences around feel. At the end of that, we say, okay, this is the right fit Hilma for you. And our fit model is such that we have, essentially we have 3 different fits right now. So we have 3 different size 8s is one way to think about it. And those tend to fit, different people's bodies. When we try them in person, people 99.9% of the time have a favorite and clear fit that works for them. So, what we wanted with it was just to, have people really comfortable in their running shoe and also empower them on the brand side to feel like, A, we were really focused on them, B, tell a range of stories about running and adventure.
So you're talking to people, they're saying, yeah, this is actually a problem. There aren't
Yes.
any legitimate reasons why it hasn't been done besides it's hard and expensive.
Yeah. So they were calling out reasons to me. There were a few. One, our model relies on a direct relationship with the customer at this point. And a lot of the legacy running brands have multi-channel, they're in retail. So that's one part of it. For us to do the prediction is a different type of company. Like that, our prediction actually requires a lot of intelligence and data and technology that we had to build out to create this. And that's kind of the space that I was in at the time. I was in the AI and blockchain space. So I was dealing with more deep technology before I started the company. And I was not thrown off by the fear of A, creating the direct to consumer experience, B, the prediction that would go into that, and the data and the analytics that we needed to understand and adapt that. I think the other thing that sometimes came up was you're kind of telling a story against yourself if you suddenly say, so brands tend to have a single fit model that they stick to. They use a similar type of last. So if one brand works for me, that's narrow, that doesn't work for my friend with a wider foot. So if all of a sudden what you're saying is actually all of our current fits, they cannot fit everyone. What we need to instead do is create a fit. We need to consider that you have different bodies. It's just telling a very different story that then has been told historically. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Um, okay, so you launch. So I'm personally fascinated by the process of creating a company. I love Shark Tank. I've been watching since the beginning. I've been at a startup where it was me and the founder. I've been at a startup where I was eighth person. Now we have 140. I find this aspect of business personally fascinating. Can you give like a 1 to 2, maybe 3 minute walkthrough for those who are perhaps less familiar of like how does a company exist when they're not selling something for the first couple of years? How does that work? How does a brand like yours go from like ideation to existence in the first couple of
Yes,
years?
totally. So footwear is an interesting example of this because the development cycles are long. And then if you're doing something different, the development cycles are even longer. I founded the company 3 years, actually 3.5 years before we launched. So it was a long time. Comparatively, some software companies found like 6 months before they are in the market and selling. So those cycles can be shorter. But when I first started, what I knew that I needed to do was find a really great team. I needed to find that expertise in footwear. So I was searching for that. I was searching for both product development and engineering as well as design, and found those people. I will say they've been so amazing. It's like a really wonderful part of the process is getting to find your team and put people together, and just build a community in that way. It's been awesome, but it's an expensive business to build also. So I needed to find investors to be able to continue doing what we were doing. So I started and I knew that process was, I mean, like I was talking about interviewing for jobs earlier, fundraising is its own beast, and there's a lot of nuance, and it's about figuring out the right people to go to. It's about telling your story in the right way. These processes become to a certain extent standardized. Like there are expectations about the materials that you have and how you run conversations, and even how you are introduced to people. So I knew that there was a lot within that. And I went out and talked to as many other founders as I could. And that community was awesome. In a similar way, I think, to the trail and running communities, that people were just willing to chat and willing to be helpful. And they told me how they did things and how they thought about things and how they valued their company at this stage and all of that. So I raised a small pre-seed round, like an angel round, it's called. And that was from people who...
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so it's a very early stage investment, and people are essentially buying equity in your company. Typical investors in that stage are other founders, like former founders. Sometimes it's venture capital. It was not for us. So in that round, I connected with people like Jason Jacobs, who was the founder of Runkeeper, which was acquired by ASICS. And just he's been awesome. Like a bunch of other founders who'd kind of been there, and were able to be not just like a check, but also really helpful to us. Yeah, strategic. So that was great, and I was able to, call those people and ask them questions as we continued to build. And year one was a lot about initial product creation. Year two was a lot about product testing and commercialization, or preparing for commercialization, I should say. Year three was like commercialization and launch. So each one of those years has looked very differently, and we've had different team and capital needs along the way. So when we were getting ready to launch and we'd sort of proven out that, people liked our initial product, we had, we knew that this idea was feasible in terms of, being a feasible business. Then I went out and raised a seed round, which was venture capital and its own whole journey. And we got ready to launch, and launched in October.
You wake up on launch morning in October. What's the first thing that goes through your head?
The first thing that goes through my head is that I didn't wake up, because I was lucid dreaming about this moment for like weeks and months before. It was insane. The intensity of preparing to launch. And it's not just everything that has to get done, but it's like all the things that happen around it. So I'll give you an example. We did really, really serious quality control on our product. So we had 100% of our product inspected before it left our factory in China. And then, it gets on an ocean container, comes into the US to our warehouse in Chicago. And Christina's our head of development, our head of product development. She and I go out to our warehouse, and we're inspecting stuff ourselves as well. Like, we really wanted to make sure everything looked great. Nothing happened on the container on the way over. And we're days away from launch. Christina calls me at the airport. I was flying out before her by like a day. She calls me at the airport, and she was like, our pallets are missing. Like, our pallets are gone. 3 of our pallets of shoes aren't here. So you're like dealing with that. It's okay. They ended up being in another part of the warehouse, but there are so many crazy things that are happening along the way that there's just an intensity to the whole thing. And then we launched, and my overwhelming feeling with the whole thing has been one of gratitude, where people have just been like so warm and so supportive and shared so much information with us and like cheered for us and, tried the product. And it's been very, it's been sort of very overwhelming in that way.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Is it a good market to buy a home in? What about to sell a home? What even goes on in the housing market? How do you even keep track? Well, good news for you. You don't have to know all the answers if you're interested in buying or selling your home, because you can just work with the best realtor around, Lauren Daniels. Whether you're thinking of buying or selling your home, Lauren is your go-to. She treats every client with care and helps make what could be a very scary process, dare I say, fun. Lauren helps you get organized and stay on top of important deadlines, and guides you towards the right home for you instead of pushing you towards something that doesn't feel right. Even if you're not ready yet, or you're not in the Denver or Boulder area, we highly recommend following Lauren on Instagram, because she's always sharing great information about the housing market. Give her a follow at lauren.in.colorado on Instagram. And if you're already ready to start the conversation, give her a shout at ldaniels@milehighmodern.com and let her know we sent you. That's ldaniels@milehighmodern.com. No slip, no fog, all conditions, all fun. They even have a pair called Après All Day, if that's more your style. Yep, I'm talking about Goodr's first step into winter sports with their snow G's. They come with 2 polycarbonate lenses, including one for low light conditions, so you can easily swap lenses when conditions change, and trust me, it's an easy swap. They're offering 100% satisfaction guaranteed with 30-day free returns. Goodr is a 100% carbon neutral company with 1% of annual sales going directly to organizations that help make the world a better place. Head to goodr.com/FTLR to get free shipping on the Snow G's or any other pair. So you launched in October. To me, it felt like worlds colliding, right? Because I've known about this for a few years, and I see my runner friends in Boulder starting to like post photos with the shoes, which is like wild. I know the feeling of like seeing my own stuff out there or organically on Instagram or social media or whatever. What was it like for you the first time you saw your shoes in the wild?
Um, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, I've definitely had a number of moments that are kind of a positive gut punch. I don't know what you call that, like butterflies. um, Seeing them show up, yeah, seeing like a picture where someone in the background is in Hilma's that I don't know, that's not like a good friend of mine who like, wanted to support whether they like the product or not. And they do like the product, that's not to roast the product, but yeah, seeing them on people that I don't know has been really crazy. We were just at Houston Marathon last weekend, and that's probably been one of the most powerful experiences, sort of like of those like wow moments where we met a ton of people and fit them in Hilma's, and when we're in person we can try them in all 3 fits, which is a unique and cool, it's a cool experience, because there's not been something like it before. And I was crouched down, trying these women in our shoes and seeing their faces, was, I wanted to cry. Like, I'm a happy crier, and I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to weird anyone out. So I was like, trying to hold, I was like, had a little tear trying to like hold back. But that was probably one of the coolest ones where it just brings it home. Like, it's really nice to be able to make stuff for this community, and this community that's like done a lot for me. So yeah.
That's how I feel about this podcast as well. Like I've had it going for 4 years now, and just like every so often you see these tweets like, "Oh, what are your favorite podcasts?" And like to see someone reply and tag this one, it's like I've learned so much from other runners and from other podcasts, and to be able to like put something out where many thousands of people are going to listen to this episode and learn something. It's just like it's so humbling is a like easy word to use to describe it, but like it feels so cool.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
Switching
I
gears a
see you
little.
guys everywhere.
Thank you.
It's, yeah,
It's super
it's
cool.
crazy.
It's
It's
like
so cool.
talk about the like building aspect of it. Like I did it myself for a year or 2 years, and then I finally added 2 people basically at the same time to help on the production and then the show notes and guest management, etc. And then last year I brought on somebody else, and she brought on 2 other people, and so I've got and I have a guy that does the website. So I've got 6 people working on this team, and like all I do now is just talk to people, and like I don't do anything else that I'm not uniquely qualified for or that I don't enjoy. And it's just like it's more fun than ever before. I'm doing less than ever before. I'm paying 6 people, and it's like it's so cool to see. And it was the same thing. Like I didn't start it because I was like, "Ooh, I need an idea for a podcast." It's like I just want to talk to cool people and tell cool stories. And it's grown into this. Like we had 1 million downloads in October, and it's
That's so
just like
awesome.
continuing to roll from here.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love it. Yeah, the team building has been, so we've got a bunch of people now. I mean, honestly, I'd have to like count them up. We've probably got 12 people or so that are working on the company every week. We have, contractors in different ways that work on different areas. But I kind of said this earlier, but it's such a nice part of the company because, first of all, you're getting to work with people who have expertise that you don't have and just learning from them. Like, I learn something every week on our product calls. And, I've learned, like, I've been now deep in this space for over 3.5 years. And I'm still learning stuff all the time, which is so cool. I think a lot about our culture. And I think this is one of the benefits of having been early. And I know, like, you've had this experience too. You see your culture grow and you see the ways that communication is replicated and the way that kind of norms are formed. So I was really thoughtful about not just how do we find people who are awesome experts at what they do, but also really good people. Like, you spend so much time at work, and when you work with people who,
particularly at a startup.
yeah, particularly at a startup, and like you take it home, like you're thinking about it when you're getting your coffee, and I don't know, me, I'm like, when I'm going to bed, when I'm in the shower, like, I'm always thinking about it. And I wanted to create somewhere that people come and learn and grow and feel heard and feel respected. And, obviously we all work hard. But also there's like to create somewhere where people feel, yeah, trusted and heard. And I think we're doing that so far. And it's been really rewarding too, to know that, like, people have chosen to work with us over bigger paychecks at other places because of the
Comfort,
type of
consistency.
impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You used a word there that I want to call out, which is trust. Our leadership talks a lot about trust, and that it's one of the most important intangibles, because a team that trusts each other is able to take more risks and support each other in risk taking. And nothing interesting happens, whether it's in running, whether it's in entrepreneurship, whether it's in a relationship with a significant other, if trust is not like the fundamental pillar. And so my experience has been like, I love messing up. I love failing. I love these risks, and like, fail fast, fail often, and most importantly, learn from it. And when you're in an environment where there's no trust, and it's like, ooh, is someone watching me? Am I going to get my wrist slapped if I make a mistake? Like, growth does not occur in cultures where there's this like fear of messing up or fear of doing the wrong thing. And so it's cool that that's been like a major tenet for you, and there's been intentionality around it. And I think it's showing in the output of the product and the excitement with the team and like everything I see on social media. But I think it's so fundamental to a successful startup. And then where I sit, it's been cool to watch that grow from 8, 10, 15, 20 people to 100 plus, and have that like trust, have that risk taking continue when it's like a serious company that's 10 plus years into it, where it's not just like a couple of guys sitting around a table anymore.
Yeah. I mean, so true. And I think there are intentional decisions that get made along the way where building trust, you either like build or lose trust. And I think you said something really interesting there about making mistakes. And it's like, what's the reaction to mistakes being made? And places where when a mistake is surfaced, it's, people are punished and they get in big trouble, and they are then incentivized to hide those mistakes. And I just, even if you want to think about it purely from a business outcomes perspective, it's so dangerous to do that because you're not going to hear about it when something is going wrong.
Right.
Like, not only are you tormenting your people and they are nervous and feel like they need to hide stuff and have like this sense of dread around something that's gone wrong, and also may feel the need to be less honest about it because it's like you don't want to like take full responsibility if it was
Or
you.
more
You want to,
timid.
or more timid. Like, yeah, there's like the whole like emotional drain of it, but there's also the practical piece of like, you want to know when something goes wrong and you don't want to incentivize people to
Right.
hide it. So like, whichever way you approach it, I think having a culture where you can be open and honest about mistakes and have it be like, when you know that people are operating under best intent too. And I think that comes in with hiring, where it's like, if you can hire people where you know that everyone is pretty like mission aligned here and is excited about what we're doing and, wants to do well. And I think that's most people want to do well. You can kind of like build that healthier culture as you grow, and it makes a life difference.
For sure. What's been the female founder experience for you? I just finished watching The Dropout with Elizabeth Holmes, and there was a lot of commentary around being a female founder and the perks and not so perky aspects of that. Curious your experience there, and if someone's listening to this who is in a similar situation, um, what's going through your head? How do you think about these things? Or do you think about these things?
Yeah, I definitely think about these things. And on one hand, I only have my own experience that I've lived. On the other hand, when I was talking about earlier, having talked extensively to other founders, this is one of the things that I've talked a lot about with like guy friends who are founders. There have been, so women are much less likely to successfully raise a venture capital round. Like I think a few years ago, only 2.2% of venture capital funding went to women.
Yeah, I think I saw a
So,
statistic lately. It was like 4%, which is crazy.
yeah, it's like still not good. And I'm a solo founder. So that also, that's another piece. Um, Talking to I felt like I knew that. And so I felt the need to really inform myself about how processes worked. I felt like I knew I needed to be extra sharp. I knew I needed to understand all areas of my business. And that said, I still encountered things that were wild and weird. And being able to talk to other female founders about it also was kind of therapeutic, where I remember talking to someone about our margins, and I was sharp on our margins. Like I was not confused, about any of it. And he said to me, this was an investor. He said, "You don't seem like you'd be very good at math. So who would be in charge of that? Like, who'd be in charge of that area of the company?" And I was like, "I'm fine in math." Like, like I was like, I took some college math. Like I'm competent here. I'm also not a CFO, and I'm aware of that. And I've sought out resources when I've needed them, which is ultimately my job. Like my job is recruiting and hiring and storytelling. Like that, that's a lot of my job, right? So, um, was there weird stuff? Absolutely. And in a way, this sounds weird, but like I was also kind of grateful when someone showed me that side of themselves, because I knew I didn't want them. I didn't want them invested in our company. I didn't want them on our cap table, which ultimately means invested in our company. I didn't want them around. And so what I tried to do with those situations was just be like, "Hey, all right, like nice meeting you. Thanks a lot for the time," and like let them leave my life, sort of thing. So that was something, and it goes back to kind of like the cultural point too. It's like that was something I didn't want around us. I also ran into things where people would tell me, so like, I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I feel really strongly about people seeing themselves represented in roles and places that they didn't expect to see themselves, perhaps. And that applies to being a founder, that applies to being a runner, being a hiker, being someone like adventuring outdoors. Part of the reason when I was younger, I didn't see myself doing these things, and I was surprised to find what I found was because there's not as much diversity. So like I hope with Hilma that we can tell those stories. We can see women as outdoorsy. We can see women, running different paces and finding joy in it and finding adventure and empowerment and just opening up their lives. And I talk, part of the, fundraising process or business building process was telling those stories. And sometimes I would meet someone who would say to me, "Women don't want to see other women with bigger bodies." And I was like, you're dead wrong. You're not living the life that my friends and I are living, where like when we see a more inclusive environment, we're like, "Oh, cool, that seems like a nicer place to hang out." But it also outlined part of the possibility for me that, there are basically no female CEOs or executives, like, C-level executives in a lot of the running companies. And it also gave me a bit of fire where I was like, you're wrong. Like, you're wrong. And part of the reason the opportunity is here is because like there aren't as many people like me around the table. So it's been interesting. And I also just want to say, like, as much as there were bad, like there are those like standout bad experiences, but the overwhelming thing was positive. And I think like going through the process of navigating who our investors were going to be and all of that, because I was really focused on values fit as well as like strategic ad, it gave me a good lens to ultimately get really good people around the table that I was excited about and trusted. And so, yeah, you kind of have to weed through some nastiness to get to the other side.
It's fascinating how you answered that question, right? It was like you basically said there was some shit. I handled it. It pushed people away, or people exposed themselves for who they really were. And the reason this opportunity exists is because it exists. And you're helping to facilitate an experience that you want to live, that other people want to live. And it's really cool to see how you framed that answer, how you're framing the company, and the mission. I'm curious. So to bring it full circle, I'm curious how running today is connected to your lived entrepreneurship experience.
It is so connected. I think it's so connected on like the emotional learning, growth, all of that. Practically, it's hard. Like the company is such an ultra and my running has become a little more moderate through that. I'm sort of like navigating and figuring out this balance of how do I still have the types of bigger outdoor adventures that I want while not dropping the ball on my team who like needs answers from me on things. And I also went through, in a way, like this sounds grim, but maybe the timing was good. Like I went through a few different injuries and like I broke my foot. Before that I'd gotten a concussion. And then before that I'd had to get checked out for I forget exactly what it's called, but it's like the risk for sudden death while running, which I did not think that I did not personally. I wasn't like, oh, I think I have this, but my doctor was like pretty spooked by a couple of experiences that I had while running. So that was like months of cardiac checkups that sidelined, that season. And then the next season I got a concussion and then I broke my foot on a trail. So I've kind of, I've been like going through those hurdles at the same time. And in a way, it's like, well, maybe I didn't have that much time for like a big adventure then anyway. So it was good to get that stuff out of the way. And I'm starting to gear up this year for some fun stuff. Like I planned out a couple of things on the calendar that I'm excited for. I'd run like last spring, I'd done a 12-hour overnight, which I absolutely loved. It was so cool. So I'm doing that 24-hour there. I should be, fingers crossed. And then a 30-hour in the fall and kind of sprinkle some other fun stuff in. But like I said, it's, tactically it's a process to figure out how it all fits together and how I can all make it work. Also without sacrificing like entirely on not seeing friends or not seeing family or, the other types of things that are energizing and uplifting and things that I care about, spending time that way too.
It's fascinating. So I think like part of millennial culture is like a work life balance, or at least an acknowledgement that there's life outside of work. For my first, I don't know, 3 to maybe 5 years of working after college, it was very much like 80 hours a week or more, and just like grinding, because I thought that's what it took to be successful. And I think it's like doing that when you're 23 versus 32 is an entirely different game. But it's fascinating to see, as more people our age get into leadership positions, like what that's going to do, right? Because it all begins, culture exists in a variety of different ways, but ultimately it's a reflection of leadership. And so if the leaders value this type of emotional and lived experience for themselves, I assume they're going to want it for their team. So I'm excited for like what does the next 10 years look like, where more people our age are getting into positions of leadership and they've grown up in this tech enabled era where you're on 100% of the time. And what is that doing to people? And once they get in positions of power and responsibility, like how do you influence for good? Is that something you've thought about? Is that like maybe subconsciously you're responding to that and iterating with the team based on that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think about in a couple different contexts. Because I think to your point about sort of more generally like burnout and how we work, there's external pressure. There's like the pressure of like your boss and pressure to climb in your career if that's something you feel pressure for. There's also like knowing yourself, and I think this comes in with running, this comes in with career stuff. It's like knowing when you can push and when you can rest is a piece that I definitely try to figure out for myself and also talk about with like I'm a certified running coach and I don't take on like coaching clients, but I definitely have friends who I talk to pretty extensively when they've got a problem or something. And that's a lot of what we talk about in the context of running specifically, where it's like really looking inside and being like, is today a day that I push or is today a day that I rest? Is today a day that I sort of like maintain? I do something light? Like, what is going to bring me energy and what is going to uplift me rather than tire me more, if that's like a direction that I'm trending in. And then on the influence side, I mean, for sure, like culturally, like for Hilma, we've tried to build in flexibility and also like celebration of that flexibility. Like Christina, our head of product, does a ton of cool adventures. Um, and her wife is also an incredible runner. And we'll talk, like, I love to hear about their adventures. I'm like, tell me what the weekend was like,
Yeah.
And so I think just having those discussions at work of what else you have going on is a nice piece of it. And then on the influence side more broadly, and, as like, I find a couple things. One, having peers who you talk about this stuff with is so helpful. Like this conversation that we're having now is so helpful. And also passing along that information to other people who are a little bit earlier in their career. So like, I feel like I've said probably a million times, like I feel really grateful that I get to do this. And part of the reason I get to do this is because people shared so much information with me about how they thought about it and how they navigated the process. And now getting to pass that along a bit and talk to whether it's women starting their running journeys or women thinking about starting a company or guys thinking about starting a company, and just being able to be really open about the trade-offs and the highs and the lows and how it all pieces together is a nice thing.
I love all that. Yeah, the gratitude aspect is huge. The ability to be where you're at because of the people that came before you, and then the pay it forward aspect of it is massive. You were talking about, you said knowing when to push and when to rest. Summer 2021. My pinned tweet is if you trust your coach when they say to go hard, you better trust your coach when they say to go easy too. I tweeted this at 9:14 on a Saturday morning. I was a couple of miles into what was scheduled to be a 20-mile long run, and a lot of stress was occurring, I think, physically and maybe also mentally. I don't remember, but the follow up tweet was today was very much a situation where I did both. My coach set my expectation that 10 miles was okay if needed. I felt fantastic at 9. He suggested I consider not overthinking it and do it. 20 miles later, I'm stoked on that decision. Mentally, that was my easiest 20 miler ever. This is something that I think is the biggest predictor of long term success and growth, right? Your ability to know when to push and your ability when to pull back. And the way I see pulling back is like you're pulling back on a bow and an arrow, and then you release it, or a slingshot, or whatever you want the metaphor to be. And I've found so much value in drawing boundaries and creating like, nope, I need to do this, whether it's stopping work early, whether it's like going for a run at 10 a.m., or whether it's like pushing the fucking pedal to the floor and like emptying the tank on a project, Black Friday push, whatever the like whatever the situation requires, when you have that capacity to push and you push, magic happens. When you don't and you push, injury, burnout, all these things that we don't want to happen happens. And so ultimately, like, maybe you're able to be successful in the short term when you push when you shouldn't. But to me, the exciting part is when people, as you said, understand that, like, boundary and respect it, honor it, and like calibrate their actions based on it. So I love the way you said it, and I'm gonna step off my soapbox now, but I love this topic.
Yeah, no, you said something really interesting in there about success. And I think part of what I see as the pressure that drives people to make unsustainable choices for them is like this idea of calling success or failure too soon. Like for most people, they want to have like a healthy body for their whole lives, right? Like I don't
Right.
think anyone's like, oh, I'm looking forward to not having a healthy body. And like take the topic of DNFs, and I think in a lot of the running community, like there's like very, people are like, oh, DNF, like it happens, like can be the smart choice, whatever. um Reframing that kind of thing, and like I agree with that, right? Where I'm like, sometimes like a DNF is a really smart choice, like that's the sustainable choice. Not only is that not a failure, it's a success. Like the success might be that you'd been struggling to listen to your body and you decided to listen to your body in that moment despite the stakes feeling high. The success might be that your year is not wrecked. The success might be that like there's another experience or adventure or day that you're going to remember that you get to do because you were able to pull the plug on that day. And I think that applies across running, across career stuff. That it's like it's so often too soon to call something a success or a failure. And when we do it, we make poor decisions around it that feel unsustainable. And I think the one other thing that you made me think of is also talking about trade-offs. Like I'll use a personal example. So the more like I work a lot now, obviously, probably unsurprisingly.
Shocker.
And shocker, spoiler alert. Um, and sometimes like I'll talk to someone who will be like, oh, like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, the reality is that there are a lot of trade-offs. Like one thing I basically don't do anymore is like drink any alcohol, because I find that like one drink and I'll like, I go out with friends and have like one drink and I'm sluggish the next day. And I'm like, that's a thing I can't handle anymore, or the trade-off is too big. And sometimes my sitting there being like, oh, it's like nice that everyone else is kind of like loose and having a glass of wine and like I'm not. Like, yes, sometimes I'm like, oh, it'd be nice to have that glass of wine, but then I'm like, honestly, I have something that I'm not willing to feel that way tomorrow. I'm not willing to feel like a little crummy, a little slow, like all of that. So I think in a good way, people are having more conversations about the trade-offs of high running volumes or impact on their family, or just making decisions that are holistic, all around decisions around energy management.
Totally. One of the people I respect most in the sport is Zoe Rome. And I got to pace her, or I got to crew her at Western States last year. Zoe coaches with Microcosm Coaching, who is a sponsor of this podcast. So if you're looking for good coaching, great people, check out Microcosm. But Zoe DNF'd Western States at mile 82. She spent several hours at mile 82 prior to DNFing. And it was one of those, like, I don't want to spend, 6 to 10 hours moving 20 more miles, 18 more miles just to have a finish. It's not worth destroying my body just to cross that finish line. And I wonder, like, she's gotten off Twitter. And I wonder, like, 5, 10 years ago, like, or 3 years ago, maybe, would she have had the same decision making process where it's like, I'm doing this for my body, I'm doing this for me, I'm doing this because, like, she's having an epic year and she's going to do epic things this year. And like, this trade-off of pushing versus respecting the process, respecting the physical and mental component is fascinating to watch it evolve. The alcohol piece is interesting as well. I partied so hard in college, and for a couple of years after college, and I just like can't do it anymore. I can't afford
Yeah.
the next day. It's like I can't afford to be a waste of space like that. And it's fascinating to see this like explosion in non-alcoholic drinks. And like I had a glass of wine the other night with a couple of friends, and I was like, I can't remember the last time I had alcohol, like full alcohol. And yeah, it's fascinating how it's like becoming mainstream to like omit alcohol. And it's cool, but it also
Yeah.
like red wine is great. I love the taste of it. I'm not drinking it for the
Yeah.
health benefits. Um, so do whatever makes you happy. Don't push too hard.
Totally. Yeah,
And wear
totally.
Hilmas.
Yeah, exactly. In conclusion, wear helmets. Yep, that's what we should take away.
um, before we wrap, I do want to ask one question. You mentioned the word success. I love talking about this word. I love I love understanding how people define it. The reason that I am so interested in this is because in 2021, I started asking, or 2020, I started asking people, like, what would you be really proud of in 10 years? And the first person I asked this to was Vanessa Fraser. She was with Bowerman Track Club, aspiring Olympian, etc. I thought she was going to say like winning a gold medal in a track event. And she was like, progressing and being part of the team. I was like, that's totally subjective. Interesting. And then I asked, 100 more people the same question. And for the most part, people who have achieved objective measures of success define success in a subjective manner. So now that I've like showed my hand on this question, I'm
Hmm.
curious how you define success.
Yeah. It's probably not a surprise because it's like the thing I keep I keep going back to, but I have this enormous gratitude for trail running, for the community, for all the adventure that it's given me. And I never expected to be here. And if I get to give that back in some way, like if some woman or girl or like whoever, some guy who counted themselves out of being an outdoorsy person finds it and feels welcome and feels like it changes their life, like I'm I'm pretty good with that. Um, and it's obviously not just about the running. It's like what it does for the rest of your life. I think how it can empower you and build resilience in you, and then the version of yourself that you take into your relationships and your community and your career, and like the impact that it has is like what's the word? It
All
grows.
encompassing. Oh, it's
Yeah.
snowball effect. Yeah.
It's snowball effect. Yeah, exactly.
Spider
So
web.
spider web. So I actually I think a lot about that, and it definitely drives me on a deeper level through like these really long days and solving really tough problems and being tired and figuring out how to balance my own energy. Is like if I could go back and tell a little version of myself like, hey, you're capable of more than you realize, and it's going to open up your life and give you a lot of joy and just be really cool. Like I wish I could tell her that, and so I want other people to have that experience.
Amazing. Brooke, it's been a blast. I hope we get to do this again on some Boulder trails, or I guess the Middlesex Fells, if I'm back in Boston. This episode was not sponsored by Hilma. I love what Brooke is up to. I think it's super cool what she's doing in the space, the team she's growing, the products she's creating. So with that said, where can someone find you if they're interested in learning more?
So just on our website, which is join-hilma.com, or if you Google Hilma running shoes, you will find us. That's the best way. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun. It's crazy. It's great.
Life is awesome. Cool. Brooke, thanks so much. And we'll see you out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.